This is the Conservative American Message, hosted by yours truly, the one, the only, Cam Lau. Before I get into today's episode, I have to ask one small favor. Please go ahead and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen and share the show with your friends. It really helps us grow the show. We've had to turn down multiple sponsors that just don't align with our values, so I'm totally relying on you guys to help us grow this thing. Thank you for your continued support. All right, yeah, I guess if we want to just go ahead and get right into it here, and if you want to just tell the audience kind of your background, who you are, what you do.
Sure. Well, I'm Marc Defant. I'm a professor of geochemistry at the University of South Florida. Is that about what you need?
Yeah, so geochemistry, I guess, what exactly is that?
Good question. I study volcanoes. I got into evolutionary psychology kind of on the side. I was working teaching honors program, science honors, and in my course back in the 90s, I started teaching evolutionary psychology in there because I thought it was really neat. And then after I got interested in it like that, I started reading everything I could get my hands on, which has led me to publishing articles now in evolutionary psychology, and that's how I got onto this topic of feminism, because of their lack of evolutionary psychology knowledge, or purposeful, in my opinion, purposely ignoring it.
So was there something in particular that drove you to write kind of a critique of modern feminist study?
Yeah, I keep hearing all of these, things and reading articles in feminist studies that pontificate things like patriarchy and fat studies and using women as objects, this kind of thing. It's really wrong from a scientific aspect. So I thought I would delve into the reason that I'm finding that feminists aren't using scientific rigor in their studies. I never see any. They constantly badmouth evolutionary psychology, but I never see anyone writing a strong argument against evolutionary psychology. So I find it very odd that that they would critique it and yet seemingly not know much about it. They seem to believe that everything is due to culture, that we're born with blank slates, and that everything that we are as people is formed by culture. And that's simply not true. I mean, study after study shows that we differ, men and women differ significantly, and we find that difference across all cultures. So we know then that culture doesn't have as big an impact as feminists and other sociologists that are studying behavior. Evolutionary psychology telling us that men and women are different, that are not only are we different physically, but we're different behaviorally. And anyone that's lived on planet Earth, I think, longer than 3 or 4 years probably recognizes that. We find people of our own sex that behave like women. We find that somewhat unusual, and vice versa with women. So we do have typical characteristics of manhood and femalehood, womanhood. Men tend to be masculine and women tend to be feminine. And those are correlated quite nicely with testosterone concentrations in men and other hormones in women, estrogen being one of them. So not only do we see these variations, but we can show that they're biologically oriented. And I find that no feminist that I know of has ever been able to show that culture would impact our hormone levels the way they do. These are genetic traits that we inherit. So things like toxic masculinity get me upset when I hear things like that. Yes, toxic masculinity can be bad. Men tend to be much more violent than women because of the testosterone. But, um, you know, we can also be good in a lot of ways. We can bring home the bacon. We can take care of families. When women want us to, we can help support the family. And we had to be brave in hunter-gatherer society, which is where our genes were chosen and evolved. I don't know if I'm talking too much here, but that gives you basics of why I got into this.
Sure. Yeah, no. It's definitely a huge issue. And I mean, why do you think that feminists have become so quick to just dismiss things like evolutionary psychology?
Well, this is going to be an opinion and not, based in factual evidence, but I think that women want, first of all, to think of men as equal, that we're all equal. It goes back to their Marxist ideas that they've gotten into in third wave feminism. Um, Not only do they think we're equal, but they think we should behave the same way. Hence the massive attack on toxic masculinity, and the feminization of the universities, where I think they're trying to tell us that, men should be more like women, and that we shouldn't have toxic masculinity. We shouldn't be the way that we are. And I see this having an impact on males on campus. No one tends to speak out against some of this, what I call nonsense. And so, I kind of want to leave it there. I don't really want to get into an attack on feminism per se. I just wish that they were a little more rigorous in their studies. I think if they were, they would see, that we do have these biological characteristics, and that, it's wrong, I think, to punish men because, some of us are violent. Violence, again, I've said this before. Violence is something that men have over women, and I think I read somewhere that 17% of men rape, and this is bad. We don't want that in our society. We got to cut down on that. So if they're referring to that as toxic masculinity, which I don't think they are, they're thinking of men in general as toxic. But yeah, I think all men would agree we need to get rid of those kind of individuals in our society. I mean, I have a sister, I have a daughter, I had a mother, I have a wife. So I'm certainly not for perpetuating those bad things about masculinity.
So you're not here to make a political argument about, men and women. I mean, you're here to talk about the science, that men and women are different from a just science standpoint. And that's what we keep hearing is there's no difference between a man and a woman. And you can become a man or a woman, whatever you want to change to. And I mean, there truly is a difference to what a man and a woman is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear this a lot on campus, where, well, with the trans movement, we've heard it a lot that, there are not two genders, there's more than two. There's a feminist that has perpetuated the idea of five genders out there, and I think some groups consider hundreds of genders. So, in certain groups, the idea of male and female has, become not reality. But I tend to go with the biology here. Um, those people those people that don't fall into categories of male and female uh, are, I think, how do I want to say this without hurting feelings? I think that they fall in between, and they're either problems with genetics or problems with things that happen at birth, but I'm not sure that we have the science to say that there are many genders or more than two or anything in between, that we're fluid. I don't know about you, but I don't get up thinking I'll be a woman today and tomorrow I'll get back to being a man. So Yeah, I wouldn't, I don't really want to get into the politics, but unfortunately, in our today's society, it's hard not to. For example, this whole deal about patriarchy is this idea that men somehow get together and decide to suppress women, and that we are, um, how do I want to say it, that we're somehow organized to suppress women. And this is the main thing I started seeing when I was doing evolutionary psychology, is that in hunter-gatherer societies, women needed support from men to raise babies. You know, babies are born without full development of our big brains. In fact, only about 25% of the development of a brain happens when you're inside the womb. So you come out, you're pretty helpless. Unlike a lot of animals, a giraffe comes out and it's able to move around almost immediately after it's born. But humans, I mean, we're totally helpless when we come out and need complete care from the mother and to some extent the father. So women are reluctant to have sex and are choosy, and they tend to be choosy. So, you know, because in hunter-gatherer society, if they weren't choosy, they got stuck raising a child by themselves. So male parental investment among humans is very important. It's not so important among other species. If you're a giraffe and you have a baby, that baby can get up and take care of itself pretty well. Obviously, it needs some help with food and those kinds of things, but those are all things that can be done on the hoof when the herd is traveling. But in with humans, when we're born, we need the help of the father, and women recognize that early on. And how does that manifest itself? Well, women are choosing men. Men are competing with each other. Now, men do choose women, but men are competing with each other to be chosen by women. I think that's a kind of a good thing. I think that women should be complimented by that. They're the ones that are choosing men, and we're beating each other up about it. Now, it's not like gorillas, who, you know, the biggest, meanest gorilla wins out and gets to have baby gorillas with all the other female gorillas. But in humans, we have much more cooperation among males, but we also have a much more subtle competition among males. So what I think we're seeing as a patriarchy is something that, you know, women are choosing for. They're choosing men, or did choose men, that are masculine, that go out and are able to compete with other men, to compete for, you know, good hunting and animals out there to bring home food. And this is rich, high protein food that families need. And so you can see where, and also men are chosen by women that are leaders. So you can see as society evolved that we had natural men going into leadership roles, and we see that in our society today, where we have more men in leadership roles. That doesn't mean, though, that we're trying to exclude women. It just means that a lot of times women gave up those roles so they could raise children. Uh, and so when we talk about patriarchy, I agree there's a patriarchy, but I don't think it's because men are getting together and deciding to oppress or suppress women or subjugate them. Um, we're just doing what's natural, or being masculine, and we're that way because we've been selected by women over, you know, well, 300,000 years or so since Homo sapiens have been on the planet. And if you think about that, then we have more of an evolutionary patriarchy, and that's what I've been calling evolutionary patriarchy, than, you know, any of this dominance patriarchy that women so often refer to. Like, I hear Hillary Clinton referring to the patriarchy as if, you know, we're all out there to get women, and it's just not fair to men. We're not doing that. And I thought these were things that needed to be addressed. I find a lot of male students on campus are, you know, walking on tiptoes because they're afraid, you know, to get jumped on because they haven't been, you know, politically correct or in tune with the leftist movement inside the universities. It's time for, I think, for men to start thinking about um, what makes them men, and understand that, you know, they're not out to get women.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, so if the patriarchy is just a natural consequence of, what we've evolved to become, things like gender disparity and gender roles and these different things, there's really no sexism involved in it, where it's a deliberate sexism of men putting down women. It's more of just naturally what we've all chosen.
I think so. Now, I think that there's discrimination going on. I won't deny that. I don't want to claim that. In fact, I think there's been some terrible things done to women in the workforce, sexual harassment and those kinds of things. And definitely that's when I think masculinity goes off the rails. I think we need to police that and police it strongly. So I'm not saying that all men are good. Certainly not. And but I am saying that we have misunderstood. I have a lot of male students that don't recognize that they're alpha males. If you're going out and you're getting a degree and you're going to get a nice salary when you get out of college, you're definitely an alpha male. And a lot of my students don't understand that, and so therefore they take I don't know, almost I don't know how to describe it, almost like they don't understand that they might be a product that women would desire. They may have been told that they're homely or whatever, but we know that at least when women are looking for a long-term mate, they don't select men that are gorgeous all the time. They select men that can bring home the bacon. They want to know, hey, what's the financial future for this guy? So we don't consider that shallow. We understand that that's, or at least I think most people understand that women are choosing because they have a family that they want to raise, and they're looking for men that are going to support the family. And so that's how nature works. But I see some people denying that, that very reality, and I find it quite frustrating. Um, so so I would like to get men to recognize that they may not be the best looking person in town, but if they're successful in their careers, uh, they should be have opportunities to find women. There are plenty of women out there, I think, that are more than happy to marry successful men in their careers. I do see a lot of women choosing not to marry too, and I'm sorry to hear that, because in my opinion, having children is, one of the greatest things that can happen. I have three wonderful children, and oh, gee, I wouldn't give that up for anything. And my wife feels the same way. And I think that a lot of women are choosing not to have children now are just missing out on a wonderful experience. And they're missing out on that because there are a lot of these feminists that are saying, no, you shouldn't go out there and be subservient to men. Well, it's not subservience. It's a sharing. At least my marriage was that way, and I know a lot of men. It's that way. Um, yes, there can be roles. Women can go out and work if they want, and men can stay home and take care of the children. But for the most part, women want to stay home and take care of the children, at least when they're young. And we see this in the studies in evolutionary psychology. Men tend to be much more focused on career, and women tend to be much more focused on children. We see this in the jobs that men and women choose. Men tend to get into STEM fields. Women tend to choose jobs like social work and education, nursing. Those are all maternal type jobs. They also choose those kinds of jobs so they can be flexible in the workplace and don't and can stay home to raise children or move with their husbands. And so we shouldn't badmouth them for that. And remember, that's just, I think, the way we have come to be after 300,000 years of evolution. I'm not saying we have to be that way. A lot of feminist scholars think, oh, men are trying to tell us how we should be. No, not at all. I'm just trying to understand how we got to the way we are. We can decide now what we want to do. We don't have to follow the evolutionary history. But I think we ought to understand how we got here so that people won't be running around saying things like, oh, it's a patriarchy and these men are out to subjugate us. Or another thing, the gender pay gap. That's constantly used to suggest that men are discriminating against women. But the gender pay gap, and this has been discovered by feminist economists, or feminine economists, I should say, women economists who have studied this field, this area for their careers. And they're finding that women, the pay gap is due to risk aversion by women. They don't like to get into high risk jobs. They don't like to get into, construction work for the most part. And they tend to choose this flexibility, which when women drop out of the workforce, they tend, when they raise the children, they tend to hurt themselves in their pay when they come back. And so there is this gap between men and women, and it's mostly due to the fact that women are leaving the workforce for a certain period of time and then going back into it, or even staying at home instead and not going back to it at all. So,
well, yeah, because we've got this propaganda that's kind of convinced everyone that men and women in the exact same job are getting paid differently because of this so-called gender pay gap. And I mean, nobody who's ever looked at it for more than 5 seconds has ever claimed that is the case. Obviously, it's the difference in what men and women have chose. And, just women in my life that I know, almost all of them, they don't want to work outside of the home for the most part. They want to be mothers. And it seems to me that even the ones that do pursue, educational goals and have high career aspirations, their ultimate goal is to get into a high caliber career and find a high caliber man there so that they can then settle down with him. And I'm not saying that's all women, but it just seems to me that that's the direction that most of them actually end up going.
well, that's very prescient. I would also just add to that if you have a good career going, and it's stable, I would say you're an alpha male, and that you can choose too. Men do choose, and in particular, alpha males can choose. And you go out and you can be selective on who you choose to marry. After all, you're going to support potentially that person in the family, and if you have the wherewithal to do that, you can be choosy. Now, women are coming back and saying, well, I don't need you to support me, and I'm going to go out and make my own way. Well, that's fine. I just don't want to marry someone like that, but doesn't mean I'm against a woman doing that if she wants to. I am finding, though, that a lot of the feminists that I've known for many, many decades have turned out to kind of regret the fact that they didn't have children. Not all of them, of course, but some of them. And I think that, if you make a choice to get rid of men in your life, you may regret that later on. You may regret the fact that you never had children. And I think that there are a certain number of women today that were convinced by the feminist movement that they shouldn't be around men and they shouldn't have children and all that. Young women may want to rethink that based on some of the things that older women are saying now about their choices. So you'll have to kind of help me out here, Cam. I don't know what your audience likes. I'm just trying to answer your questions. But if you find an area that you'd like your audience to know more about, I'd be happy to try to address it.
Yeah, well, I was kind of wondering about this, if you could explain the Scandinavian equality paradox that I saw you kind of talked about.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an interesting study. It was done by Stote and Geary, I think about 2021, where they looked. We have measurements of how a culture, how egalitarian a culture is. And then they're just general measurements. They measure how many women are graduating from colleges, and they measure how many women are in the workforce. And it turns out that the Scandinavian countries are probably some of the most advanced in equality uh, than any countries in the world. And if you go to countries like in Africa, Morocco and Libya and those kinds of countries, they're some of the worst in the world. So, in terms of equality, so what they did is they went and said, okay, how many people are in STEM? We would anticipate that in the Muslim or in the African countries, or anywhere that there's not as egalitarian a society, we would expect to find those women not getting into STEM fields as much as men, but it turns out to be just the opposite. The Scandinavian countries have fewer women getting into STEM than the poorer countries in the world, and the thinking here is that women in the poorer countries don't have a chance to choose. They have to go out and earn the salaries, even though they would prefer to get into other fields, whereas women in the Scandinavian countries have the right to choose, and they choose not to get into STEM. And this is another area that gets me to pulling my hair out, because I see that women don't like computer science that much. Yes, there are some, and we should allow them in. But this idea that we should have 50-50 in computer science or in STEM in general is crazy, or that we should have 50-50 men in nursing. I don't know about you, but most of the men I know don't want to be nurses. So fine if you're a guy that wants to be a nurse. I'm not saying that. It's just I'm looking at general trends. And in general trends, it's very hard. For example, in the Scandinavian countries, it's very hard to get men into nursing. It's very hard to get women into STEM. So we should be letting men and women do what they want to do, especially when we're in societies like the West, where we have the freedom to choose. And that's all I'm saying, there, basically. Not that we should just not force people to make decisions that they don't want to make.
Well, and I know we're more focused in this conversation on the gender aspect, but that even comes in a racial aspect of, pushing that we need to have exact equality of every race in every field, and it just doesn't work out that way in the real world. And instead of assuming that it's a consequence of our evolution and our own choices, we always just point to discrimination first. But
yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, we do have a concept in America that if there is a disparity, there's some sort of discrimination. And I think we got to get away from that. For example, when we see more women in education, there might be an idea that we're discriminating against women in science or in STEM courses. But as far as I can tell, there's no discrimination. It's that women are actively choosing fields like that. And I think it's true also with race, as you mentioned, although I haven't studied that specific area. It wouldn't surprise me at all to find that we're seeing choice involved there rather than discrimination. Again, I got to be careful. I'm not saying that there's no discrimination. I'm just saying that a lot of times we sense that disparity must mean discrimination, and that is not always the case, clearly.
So I think, everyone's aware of like feminist studies and a lot of that stuff that goes on, but I have never even heard of this. What is fat studies?
Oh boy. Well, this is one of the topics I use to show that feminists are not looking at rigor in their fields. I find in feminist studies that somebody's got an idea and they publish it, and then everybody goes, oh, that's a great idea, or that's a bad idea. And then there's this echo chamber, and the people that like an idea, that's the idea that gets accepted in the literature, and they move forward with that idea. That's how we got things like patriarchy and social construction, and of course that's how we got into this fat studies. And what fat studies is telling us is that you can be healthy at any size. And I got to be careful here because I don't want to hurt people's feelings, but I don't think we should discriminate against people that are overweight, but at the same time, I don't think we should be encouraging people to be overweight. Every study I've read, and there are hundreds out there, show that there's a tremendous correlation with death and disease if you're overweight. Yes, it's true that some large people can be healthy, and the people I pointed to in my paper were sumo wrestlers. Sumo wrestlers are on a rigorous schedule. They are out there practicing every day physically, hammering each other, and they have these very expensive and distinct diets which help them to get protein but not, not well, and build fat up, but they are extremely healthy if you look at their heart. And so their fat, as I understand it, is on the outside, and you can still remain healthy. But for the most part, um, overweight people aren't that way. Overweight people in our society are desperately in need of exercise, better eating, and being aware of that. And they shouldn't be using um, this idea that fat at any size is a good thing, because it's not. Cancer, you name it, heart disease, death, of course, and even fertility. Well, one of the reasons that men are oftentimes not attracted to women is that we have a subconscious ability to define healthy women. And one of the ways we do that is that beauty is is a way for men to decide whether a woman is healthy and young. And those are two things that were selected for by men in hunter-gatherer society. So we do choose beautiful women, not because we're shallow. We choose beautiful women because they tend to be healthy and they can have children for a longer period of time, their youth. And that seems to be very provocative to feminists, but it's very clear that that's what's going on. It's not objectification if I choose to marry a beautiful woman. I'm not objectifying women. I'm not objectifying the woman that I think is beautiful. It used to be that women appreciated us for finding them. And certainly it's crazy because women spend an inordinate amount of money on cosmetics. They're driving the cosmetic industry. Men tend to put their money into porn. We can get into the reasons for that. Whereas women tend to put their money into cosmetics. They're trying to make themselves look attractive to men or other women, as depending on your direction. But in general, then, I would say that objectification, and I write about this in the paper too, that objectification of women isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's actually a compliment, in my opinion. If you want to look at it in a bad way, women might be objectifying men because they want to marry men with money. But I don't think that's objectification. I think they're just looking for, and they may not even know this, the same way men may not know that they're looking for healthy women when they choose beauty. But it's a way subconsciously to get us to choose what we want and what we, what will make us and our family happy. Or
So there are actual, objective biological metrics for beauty. Not to say that beauty isn't somewhat subjective, obviously. Everyone has their own preferences, but there is an objective standard of beauty.
well, Cam, I can tell you most certainly there is, and if many studies have been done across cultures, and what happens is that men tend to choose the women in their own culture as more beautiful than women in other cultures. But if I go to, let's say, in Indian culture, the women that I would choose as beautiful in an Indian culture will be the same women that men in that culture choose. I may rank American women higher than, well, what is an American woman? I should say Caucasian women higher than I would Indian women. Not necessarily, by the way, but anyway, I might rank them higher, but in general, I'll agree with all other cultures where the men rank those women. And another aspect of this is, so one thing is we all agree on what beauty is, and I can name off some characteristics of beauty: high cheekbones, good facial complexion. It goes on and on. Symmetry is very important. But if you put guys into fMRI and you look at their brains, people have done this, researchers have done this, and they show them pictures of what everybody has chosen as beautiful women, and they show the pictures to men. Our brain lights up. Well, we're talking about heterosexual men now, but our brain lights up, and we uh, we pretty much all agree on what beauty is, and there are physical things that are making us like that. Uh, we get chemicals that go into our brain that actually make us feel good when we see beautiful women. So I won't get into the chemistry there, but it's quite complex, but it's very interesting. And if you show men homely women, or you show men other men, we're talking again heterosexuals, nothing lights up. It's just, absent of lighting up. So it's very clear that there are very genetic and physical reasons why, or that we choose beautiful women, or we find beautiful women attractive. You know, it's crazy, but this is what masculine, feminine, that's what attracts us to the opposite sex. And I don't know why feminists want to deny this, but they certainly seem to have marched off into another world of non-reality. And this is where my complaint about the lack of rigor I think has a basis, if you will.
Well, and where feminism always seems to kind of point to, it always comes down to this issue of rape. It seems like that's kind of their, that's what they always point to about everything, and bringing this beauty conversation into this. What is the evolutionary psychological, motivation for men raping women? Is it coming from power or sexual desire?
Well, if you go to a feminist class, it would say power. Let me just read something to you. In a book by Susan Brownmiller in 1975, she argues that rape is not primarily sexual, but and I'm quoting now, conscious process of intimidation by which all men keep all women in a state of fear. So basically she's saying, and this has been picked up by many, many women, McKinnon, all of the radical feminists over the years have picked up on this idea that men are keeping women in a constant state of fear because of rape. And so, that's been totally debunked now. And it was debunked back in the 70s. It just that it hasn't gotten any press within feminist studies. The reason that men that rape, there's a debate as to why men rape, but it looks like for the most part they're sociopaths. And I mentioned earlier that I think 17% of men lean towards rape, and they're not. I don't think that's normal. Most males don't want to rape, and we see that in society. Nobody that I know wants to propagate the idea that men are raping, or that we should rape in order to keep women afraid. So it seems like it's so out of touch with reality, and yet I find this is a kind of a current running through feminist studies, and I wish they would get away from that and start recognizing that there's more to this biology than they want to admit.
Well, and it's hard to even have this conversation without it turning into sounding like we're being dismissive of rape or something like that, where,
right.
That's not at all the intention. No. We're just trying to get to what is the actual motivation for this, because, 17%, to me, that seems like a decently large chunk,
It is.
Almost 2 in every 10 men.
Yeah.
And so that's a problem, and if we're going to get to the root of that problem, we need to figure out where this is actually coming from.
I agree. And I can't think it was 17%. It seems like such a high number that I wonder if I misread it. But anyway, I'll try to go back and find out for you. But you're right. As a man, I don't want to be thought of as a potential rapist. But I think all women have to be careful, and that's I guess that's why they're fearful of it. But I would like to think that they're fearful of these 17% of men rather than all men. And I think if they're careful, they will be able to find men that aren't that way.
So you don't think the solution is just for all men to start taking feminist courses and then we would all just stop our incessant raping?
No, and I can tell you're being facetious, and I agree with you. It's kind of crazy to say that women should be teaching men how to be nice. That's sort of an attitude of, well, we want you to be more like us, and therefore we'll teach you how to be more like us. That's not a good way to behave, in my opinion. We should be accepting of men like I assume you and me, where we are not out there trying to hurt women in any way. We believe in equality, but we don't want to be looked upon as a potential rapist just because we're a man.
Yeah, and you kind of hinted at it earlier, but I think now we have, especially in young people and modern dating, there's this huge oversensitization to consent about, how what's a young man even supposed to do anymore?
Yeah, and I've thought many times I'm glad I'm not dating now. The I have a lot of students that talk to me about this from time to time, and I see the problems, but at the same time I also recognize that there are a lot of creepy men out there. So I don't like. There's the guy. He went to prison forever for this, but it was a woman that passed out, and he was having sex with her, and two guys were walking by, and so he ran, and they chased him down and arrested him, and he got arrested. I mean, that's not the kind of thing you should be doing. So obviously, there's some problems out there with men's behavior, and you'd like to think that I would like to, as a father of a daughter, think that when a woman says no, that means no to a man. And I think we're getting better at that. Men are. And in the workplace, we're getting better. And things get confusing in the workplace because, you can meet an attractive person in the workplace, but what do? Do you ask that person out? Is that going too far in the workplace? I don't know. It's must be a tough world out there for people
Yeah,
trying to date.
I'm glad I got married right out of high school and I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah,
well, it's probably
no.
not as bad as we think, but I'm not sure I'd know how to behave out there.
Yeah, well, and there's just so many men being falsely accused of things. And I mean, I know I've even had friends that it's never gotten to the point of, any legal repercussions, but they've had women threatening them that they were going to say, well, you raped me if you don't do this or that for me. And, it can be a scary situation.
Yeah, I've heard about that, and I think it's something real that men have to be concerned about. You know, we in university professors, male professors now, I think some of us are very careful. I never shut the door when a woman comes to see me. Maybe that's being prejudicial towards women, but I don't shut the door on anybody. But you have to use some caution. I think men have to be cautious and women have to be cautious. And I think it's good that we've got women now that are willing to say, okay, he tried to rape me, but at the same time, misusing that is also something that, well, I got quite upset when women were saying we have to believe all women because, anybody that's been out there for a while know that women can lie. And there are cases of women lying. I would give you the Duke lacrosse team, if you remember that fiasco, where they accused the entire Duke lacrosse team of raping or being involved in that rape of the woman. Finally, the men were found to be innocent. Their lives were made hell because of it.
Well, I'm sure if there's such a large percentage of men that are inclined to act out in that way, then I'm sure there's just as large a percentage of women who would have the sociopathic tendencies to lie about that at the same token.
Yeah, maybe
So,
so. Although I tend to be careful about equating similarities between men and women, simply because I know there are evolutionary differences between us. But yeah, in general, I would agree.
well, and it's almost kind of ironic, like if everything in feminism is meant to be subjective, how can they even claim that rape is wrong? I mean, when you go so far down that path, you kind of lose all your standing for making any argument.
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest with you, I really don't. Uh, I, I just, I just feel like we have to be, we have to be. Well, why I'm hesitating here is because of Title IX. We have this terrible thing that's happened in the universities where men have been accused of rape, and because of Title IX, we weren't under Obama. We weren't allowed to. We being men were not allowed to bring in lawyers if they're accused. They're not. They don't have to face their accusers. There were a whole lot of things that put men in a terrible position and took away their rights. And I think under the Trump administration, those have been rectified, but they're still not totally. And this was due primarily to diversity studies. They turned out to be kangaroo courts, in my opinion, accusing men of rape and then finding ways uh, to get that male prosecuted, not prosecuted, but demonized in the university. And that's another, and I say this cautiously because I know I'm going to be attacked for saying it, but we have to be careful. All people are deserving of fair treatment if they've been accused of something. I think we've lost that in our university kangaroo courts.
Yeah. So, this whole feminist studies thing, is there any actual science in any of it? Is there any legitimacy to feminist studies at all as an academic area of study?
That's a good question. I think there is. Um, there are some fields where, these are oftentimes women in feminist studies have gone from sociology into feminist studies, and they have a background in how to conduct scientific research and do so. So I don't want to paint all feminists as bad or as not doing rigorous studies. But I think in general, if you read what feminism is and why it was created, and at the beginning of my paper I define it, it's really of a political idea. It's to try to take power away from men and to give it to women. And and I think that whole concept is kind of not based in reality, because men aren't taking necessarily haven't taken power from women. In fact, men are very open to allowing men or women to have power. So if you keep saying that patriarchy is due to a number or to all men getting together to oppress women, then yeah, that makes sense to have a feminist studies program that would do away with that. But what I'm saying is that's not what a patriarchy is. It's an evolved state, and it can be changed, and it is being changed. So my point of view is, do we really need feminist studies in academia, where I think in academia we try to have a neutrality towards opinions of a political nature. We try to have science be the basis of our decision making, where truth is what we seek, not necessarily political advantage. So that's where I think things like feminist studies, and you can go into queer studies, all these areas of critical theory, and that's the key here, critical theory. Sorry about the phone ringing in the background. Where you have sort of a Marxist attitude and a very political skew. So critical race theory would fall under that. And these all have deep roots in Marxism, coming from the Frankfurt School in Germany, and all the people coming over here from that school and populating American universities back in the 30s. They were actually trying to escape Nazism, and they were invited by American scholars to come here. So our universities got populated with Marxists because we allowed them to escape from Nazism. Strange, huh?
Yeah. Well, what would that actually look like? A productive fact base, whether it's feminist scholarship or the, queer studies, fat studies, what would the actual productive, factually grounded program look like?
Well, I would say that they should be in think tanks, not in the universities. So think tanks are specifically generated to think about political problems and how to get whatever you want out of those political problems. But if we're going to have women's studies now, we ought to have men's studies. Women right now, more professors are women, more students are women. Women are dominating in the field of law. Women are dominating in the medical fields. So maybe we need to start thinking about having men's studies on campus to, negate what I see as dominance from females.
Yeah. Well, I guess any other thoughts as we're wrapping up here? I mean, this has been a really good conversation, I think.
Thank you.
And
yeah, me too.
I really appreciate, the way that you look at these issues, where myself and most people that I talk to, we're more so politically trying to look at arguing these things, and you're just coming at it from the science, and you're not trying to offend anybody or hurt anyone's feelings.
Really not.
It's just there's actual fact to this.
Yes. That's all I ask, is for a hearing. If people disagree, fair enough. I would prefer that if they disagree, that they come up with alternative facts that refute what I'm saying. But, that's not necessarily the way the game is played, particularly in universities these days. But I do want to thank you for having me on. It's very nice of you.
Well, that's all I have time for. Were you offended by this podcast? Good. Hey, thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate you all. Have a great week and stay conservative.